You probably think of Julius Caesar as the guy in the toga who conquered a bunch of people, had an affair with Cleopatra, and got stabbed. That's the gist of the story, but it turns out there was a lot that your high school teacher neglected to mention. It's often said that the cesarean section was named after Julius Caesar, who was said to have come into the world via this now common medical procedure. But there's several small problems with that legend, starting with the fact that in ancient Rome, women who underwent cesarean sections were either already dead or about to become dead because the procedure didn't usually involve sewing the unfortunate mom up again afterward. Considering Caesar's mom became one of his political advisors, she probably wasn't dead. The practice of removing a baby from a dying mother's abdomen existed long before Caesar's birth, and when Roman historian Pliny the Elder wrote about a certain Caesar who was born by, quote, an incision in his mother's womb, it wasn't the Caesar you're thinking of. It was his distant ancestor and likely the first in his line to bear that name, as Caesar may have been derived from the Latin word which means to chop, hew, or cut out. Yikes. Caesar did a lot of things that could be considered epic, but nothing is quite so awesome on a resume as a skills section featuring that time he got kidnapped by pirates. The story goes like this. En route to Greece, Caesar's ship was attacked by pirates who told him they'd be ransoming him for 20 talents. Caesar was appalled, not because he was being held for ransom, but because he was being ransomed so cheaply. The pirates were probably confused, but went ahead and raised the ransom. They were evidently very polite pirates. They treated Caesar well and laughed when he joked that someday he would hunt them down and have them all crucified. Oh, good times. Then they got their ransom, let him go, and Caesar hunted them down and had them all crucified. But because they'd been pretty nice to him when he was in captivity, he had their throats cut first. He was a merciful guy, that Caesar. Before Caesar, the calendar was a mess. It was based on lunar months, and 12 lunar months equaled 355 days. The Romans tried to make up for the other 10 days by adding random days here and there, but the whole process was really imprecise, and the calendar was so messed up, by the time Caesar came along, January wasn't actually a winter month anymore. Caesar was annoyed, so after consulting with Egyptian astronomers, he decided to add 67 days to the current year to bring the months back in line, and then make a standard year 365.25 days long, which was the birth of leap year. Caesar then named July after himself, and a few years later his adopted son Octavian took the name Augustus and eventually named August after himself, which was cool, except that meant September, which means 7, became the 9th month, and October, which means 8, became the 10th month. It's like they knew that someday no one would be speaking Latin anyway.
Finished! Right. Now don't do it again.
Early in his life, Caesar kind of fancied himself a poet and wrote a poem titled The Voyage. It described a journey from Rome to Hispania, but the work was lost in the Middle Ages because Christian monks didn't think poetry written by a 1st century BC Roman dictator was really worth preserving. Or maybe because they just thought it was bad poetry. They never really said, not directly at least. Other writings disappeared well before the medieval monks had a chance to declare them bunk. Caesar wrote a tragedy called Oedipus and a poem titled In Praise of Hercules. While there had been plans to publish and distribute them both, those plans were squelched by Caesar's heir, Augustus, who may or may not have been embarrassed by his predecessor's poetry.
We wrote one last night outside the mini-mart. Morris called it, Stuart Drives a Comfortable Car.
Julius Caesar might have built a mighty empire, but it was at the expense of a great republic, and there were a lot of people in his circle who really didn't like what had become of their country. In March of 44 BC, Caesar's secret enemies, all members of the Senate, cornered him near the theater of Pompeii and stabbed him 23 times. That was the end of Julius Caesar, but if it had just been one or two guys, history could have been very different. Roman citizens were all dying to know just how the assassination went down, and that's probably why we have a detailed record of Julius Caesar's autopsy, the very first report of its kind known to history. In the report, the examining physician declared that only one of the 23 wounds Caesar had sustained was actually fatal, which either says something about the resiliency of the man or the not very impressive assassination skills of the average Roman senator. We modern people love to imagine that somewhere in our veins runs the blood of a famous leader like Charlemagne, Genghis Khan, or Julius Caesar. And while there is actually a not small possibility that you might be directly descended from Genghis Khan, and a legitimate possibility that you might be descended from Charlemagne, there is exactly zero chance you might be descended from Julius Caesar because he had no surviving children. His daughter Julia died in childbirth, and her baby died soon afterward. Cleopatra's son, the unfortunate Caesarion, and supposed child of Caesar, was murdered by the Emperor Augustus when he was 17, so he left no children behind either. There's a possibility that Caesar's blood might live on through some unknown illegitimate child that history did not acknowledge or remember. In fact, it's not hard to imagine that a mother might want to hide that sort of paternal information, knowing it could put her child's life in danger. On the other hand, no one came forward claiming to be the child of Julius Caesar later in life either. Since he was cremated, there's no bones to test and, well, basically no way of tracing his lineage, even if it did exist. That's a total bummer. Check out one of our newest videos right here. Plus, even more grunge videos about your favorite stuff are coming soon. Subscribe to our YouTube channel and hit the bell so you don't miss a single one.